Feel the warmth of a crackling wood stove, smell fresh bread baking, and hear the clatter of old pots on a worn wooden table. We're stepping right into a 1970s country kitchen, where supper was simple, resourceful, and packed with flavor. Why did these down-home hillbilly pantry suppers vanish from our tables? What made them so unforgettable, and why are they making a comeback now? Get ready to unlock the secret behind these cozy, budget-friendly meals, and learn how you can bring them back to life in your own kitchen. Step into any 1970s hillbilly kitchen, and the very first thing that hits you isn't just a smell, it's a feeling. It's like walking straight into a hug you didn't know you needed. Every surface is filled with purpose. There's a sack of flour on the counter, usually white all-purpose, because it could do just about anything. Beside it sits a brown paper bag dusted with yellow cornmeal, the cheap kind from the local mill. They'd always have a jar or two of dried beans, pinto beans if you're in Tennessee, maybe navy beans or black-eyed peas a little further east. These weren't fancy or expensive, but they could feed a family of 6 for a week if you worked them right. You'd see mason jars lined up wherever there was a spare shelf. Sometimes they'd be sparkling clean, ready for the next batch of green beans from the garden. Other times, they'd be filled with treasures, glowing red tomatoes preserved in brine, string beans bobbing in vinegar, or whole peaches in syrup so sticky you had to lick your fingers after spooning one out. Each jar was a badge of pride, proof that you could work the land and make it last all winter. The biggest staple was probably lard. It sounds old-fashioned, but for a 1970s hillbilly family, there was just no substitute. You might find a coffee tin, or even a big lidded crock under the sink, half full of the soft, creamy stuff. It was the secret behind flaky biscuits, fried apples, and crispy chicken. And if money was tight, bacon grease did the trick. After breakfast, someone would pour off the drippings and save them in a mug, ready for the next meal. The smell alone, rich and smoky, was enough to make your stomach rumble. Another detail, dried beans weren't just meal stretchers, they were at the heart of community. It wasn't unusual for a neighbor to stop by asking, "Y'all got a scoop of beans to spare till Friday?" And of course, someone would always fish out a cup or two, sharing what little they had. That tradition of helping out, no questions asked, made these kitchens a lifeline in tough times. Sometimes, younger kids would help, sitting at the table and shucking beans, their small voices mixing with the quiet popping sound as each shell opened and beans fell out. One story you'd hear if you spent time around these kitchens, families really did make nearly everything do double duty. For instance, after supper, the washboard came out. You might see someone scrubbing laundry out back in a big basin, but turn around in the kitchen an hour later, and that same washboard had a new roll grating potatoes for supper. It was all about making do. Some folks even used those boards for tenderizing meat if you didn't have a mallet handy. Can you picture that squeak squeak as someone gently presses a cut of squirrel or rabbit against the metal surface, prepping it for the stew pot? That's real resourcefulness. Then there's the cast iron skillet. You'd spot one in every home. Black as a crow on the outside, shiny as glass inside. There's a special sizzle it makes when you drop a pat of lard or a thick slice of salt pork onto the hot iron. The heat travels up your arm. The pan never leaves the stove except for a quick wipe with an oily rag. Sometimes the handles were covered in old dish towels to keep from burning your hands. Once in a while, a skillet would be so well cared for, the bottom would look like a mirror reflecting the kitchen light. Stoves themselves were another character in the story. In the hills, you'd likely find wood-burning stoves. Big, black, and always warm to the touch. Some folks had modern electric stoves, but the old-timers stuck to what they knew. In winter, the stove heated the house and drove off the chill, and in summer, it made for sticky, sweltering rooms everyone complained about. The wood pile outside had to be kept full. You could hear the thunk-thunk of splitting logs and the scrape of wood on metal as someone loaded up the firebox before dawn or just after sunset. Sometimes smoke caught in your throat, and your eyes would water, especially on cold, wet mornings. Inventiveness was the name of the game. If a recipe called for something you didn't have, like sweet butter, You used bacon grease or extra lard. Eggs from the coop sometimes went missing to hungry raccoons, so a chunk of mashed potato or a bit of cornmeal might stand in for binding. Sugar was pricey, so honey or molasses, drawn in slow strings from a battered jug, brought a little sweetness to cakes and breads. And don't forget beans. Every week you'd find a bubbling pot on the back of the stove, filled with beans, a ham bone, and a handful of salt. The delicious aroma would fill the house by supper time, and folks would gather around, dipping their ladles and sometimes just slurping straight from their bowls. There's a deep comfort in beans that slow-cooked all day while chores went on. Just as important as the ingredients was the ritual, meals weren't only about eating. They were about coming together. You'd hear wooden spoons scraping against cast iron pans, and the clinking of mason jars passed around filled with iced tea or sweet tart lemonade. Evenings stretched on, stories flowed, and grins passed between folks as they reached for another slice of cornbread. Every utensil had a story too. A neighbor might remark, "That's my grandma's biscuit cutter," as they stamped dough on a wooden board worn smooth by decades of breakfasts. If you listened close, you'd catch the laughter and gentle teasing over whose cornbread turned out most golden, or a complaint about someone cheating a little extra crackling into their slice. These playful moments painted the whole kitchen in warmth, adding more than just calories to every meal. That nostalgia sticks with people. Maybe it's the sound of the squeaky oven door, or the way flour dust hangs on the afternoon light, swirling through an open window. Maybe it's the soft thud of a heavy dough ball on a floured board while someone kneads bread for the night's meal. Or maybe it's the sight of a row of jars, catching the sun, promising good food no matter what winter brings. For many, scarcity turned hardship into tradition. Whether you were scraping the bottom of a flour sack or making sure not to waste a single bean, every ingredient counted. It taught patience, too, waiting on the dough to rise, or for beans to get soft enough to eat. Some nights all you had were leftovers tossed into a skillet. But those suppers were some of the most comforting bowls you'd ever eat. Even the tools were special. A splintery rolling pin that had outlived 2 generations, or a battered coffee pot that hissed and puffed every morning. Sometimes a child would learn to measure by filling cups with beans, counting each handful with sticky fingers. These weren't just objects, they were links in a chain, passing down skills, stories, and flavors. And that's just the start. Before we even get to actual recipes, the rhythm of these kitchens set the tone for every meal. Because behind every bite was a story of making do, sharing what you had, and wringing the best out of whatever the pantry gave up that night. But the real magic? It was how those humble things came together. How flour, a little fat, and a pinch of salt turned into tender biscuits. How an old washboard kept everyone clean and well-fed. How a battered skillet could fry, bake, simmer, and serve. That mix of smart kitchen know-how, care, and just plain grit is what made 1970s hillbilly suppers so satisfying and memorable. So what kinds of dishes did all those pantry staples make possible? And why do so many of them seem to have disappeared from our tables? There's a whole world of flavorful, hearty meals just waiting to be rediscovered. And some of the best ones might surprise you. Ready to see what's next? Let's get into the good stuff. The heart and soul of old hillbilly kitchen life. The suppers themselves. Nights in those rural homes were full of dishes that didn't just feed people, they brought them together. These recipes were born out of hard times, sure, but they turned into something much bigger. A reason to gather, to tell stories, to laugh, and to make do with what you had. Number 1. The king of the table. Skillet cornbread. The combo of cornmeal, buttermilk, and a kiss of bacon grease sizzled up in a black iron pan was pure gold. Cynthia, a school teacher from Kentucky, once said, "If you didn't make cornbread at least 5 times a week, you just weren't cooking." The crust would be crackly and brown, buttery inside, and the smell alone could drag the whole family in from the fields. Some folks like it with a drizzle of honey, others with a spoonful of beans. Either way, bites of this were the start to any proper hillbilly meal. I remember hearing stories of families racing to be first at the table just for that coveted corner slice. the extra crispy bit. And even today, folks will argue over whether you should use white or yellow cornmeal. It's a debate that starts in the kitchen and usually ends with a taste test. Next on the list, ham hock stew. This was the original slow-cooked comfort food. Picture a big pot bubbling away, packed with beans, carrots, potatoes, and a meaty smoked ham hock in the middle. The fat would melt, making everything rich and savory, while the aroma filled every cranny of the house. Little kids would ask, "Is it ready yet?" Every few minutes. Leftovers, if there were any, made the best sandwiches the next day. And there's a certain joy in waking up to the scent still hanging in the air, knowing lunch would be just as delicious as supper. Third, we've got fried cabbage and apples. Strange, maybe. But trust this. The cabbage caramelizes with salty bits of bacon and juicy apple slices that go sweet and soft. It's smoky, tangy, salty, and sweet in every mouthful. This one always brought smiles, like the time Eleanor remembered her granny's voice shouting from the porch, "Don't forget the apple peelings now." The sizzle of cabbage hitting hot bacon fat, that smoky snap and faint sweetness, it tastes like home. Folks would pile it high on their plates, telling stories about how mountain apples were sometimes the only fruit around after a long winter. Fourth, chicken and dumplings. Simple, gentle, and so comforting after a long, cold day. The chicken got stewed right on the bone with black pepper and plenty of salt. Then fluffy dough balls would be dropped in to soak up all the juices. Each bite felt like being wrapped up in a warm blanket. Steam would rise as you lifted the lid, bringing the smell of tender chicken, thyme, and rich broth. Folks fought over who got the last dumpling. Once, at a family reunion, my cousin Sarah hid the last one under some chicken bones. Just so she could claim it later, everyone laughed so hard, nobody even got mad. Fifth, pinto bean soup with corn cakes. This was meal stretching at its best. Pinto beans, onions, and ham scraps boiled up all day, then served with little golden cakes crisped in a skillet. Every spoonful was hearty, and corn cakes were perfect for sopping up broth. Grandma Hazel once said, "If you could see the bottom of your bowl, you weren't doing it right." Everyone would sit, elbows bumping, scraping every last drop as the sun went down and lamps flickered to life. The soups might have been simple, but the company made the meal. Sixth, sawmill gravy on biscuits. Flour, pork drippings, a splash of milk. It was a way to make a small piece of meat go a long way. The gravy got poured over thick, fluffy biscuits, turning a simple breakfast into a filling supper. The smell of sausage fat sizzling, flour browning, then sizzling as milk hit the hot pan. That's something you never forget. In my uncle's house, we used to take turns stirring the gravy, standing on a creaky old stool. It almost felt like an unspoken ritual, passing down skill from one hand to the next, letting the youngest add their first dash of black pepper. Seventh, fried green tomatoes. Tomatoes plucked just before they ripened, sliced, salted, dipped in cornmeal, and fried in shimmering lard. They'd come out tangy and crisp outside, with a melting insides. Samantha remembers the ping of hot oil and how the kitchen would get steamy and loud, like a party before anyone even sat down. One bite, and you'd understand why folks risked green stains on their hands just to pick the perfect tomato off the vine. The sound of plates clinking, the snap of crispy edges, it all added to the chorus. Eighth, rabbit stew. In the hills, hunting was just part of life. Rabbits went in the pot with potatoes, onions, and sometimes wild turnip greens. The stew simmered for hours, and the meat would fall apart with a spoon. If you listen close, maybe you hear the clink of a metal ladle and the gentle bubble of broth thickening over the fire. Just the mention of rabbit stew might spark a story from someone who remembers their granddad teaching them how to set a simple snare. It's a dish with roots, both in the kitchen and the woods. Ninth, potato cakes or tater-tot patties. Leftover mashed potatoes mixed with flour and a little onion, then fried up crispy. The outside always browned up perfectly, leaving the inside fluffy. These were the answer to what's for dinner. When times were thin, kids begged for second helpings, and parents loved how nothing went to waste. I still remember the pop and hiss as patties were dropped in the pan. My dad would sneak one off the plate before they cooled. Mouth burning, grinning all the way. Last but never least, mock apple pie. This was peak creativity, a dessert that used crackers, lemon juice, sugar, and cinnamon to fool people into believing they were eating real apple pie. During lean years, when fruit was scarce, this treat felt almost magical. Folks might grin and say, "Bet you can't tell what's in it." And rarely did anyone guess the secret. My aunt would always slice and serve it with a flourish, asking, "Now, who's got the sharpest taste buds at this table?" What made all these dishes special? It wasn't just about filling bellies on the cheap. Every supper had a way of turning an ordinary night into something memorable. The techniques, like baking bread in cast iron straight over glowing coals, or making do with a single stove burner by timing each skillet just right, came from years of practice and plenty of trial and error. You'd hear the whoosh of flour dusting the counter, the crack of eggs, the rhythmic tapping of knives, and above all, laughter. Let's not skip the sensory overload. Cornbread crunching between your teeth, the rich gravy sliding over soft biscuits, gravy bubbling on the stove, or that sharp, vinegary tang of fried green tomatoes. You could close your eyes and see it. Plates piled high, hands reaching for seconds, steam swirling around the kitchen lamp. The air felt thick with good food and better company. There's a certain glow, lamplight mixing with the golden hue of cornbread, and the kitchen's windows fogged up from all that simmering stew. Today, you might not have hours to slow cook a ham hock or pick wild greens, but there are hacks for the modern cook. Use a slow cooker to soften beans or pre-cook dumplings and freeze them for busy nights. Canned biscuit dough still tastes great under thick, creamy gravy. And if you're not ready to try rabbit stew, substitute chicken thighs. You'll get close to the flavor with less of the adventure. Even cooking on an electric stove instead of open flame, you can catch some of those flavors. Get your pan good and hot, let things brown up, and don't be afraid to improvise a little. That's the beauty of these recipes. They bend to fit your pantry, your schedule, and your family's tastes. The real trick is keeping that spirit alive. The sense of gathering, sharing, and finding joy even when ingredients are simple. As one old-timer said, you don't need much. Just a little love, some laughter, and a big enough skillet. So, you've heard the favorites that ruled dinner tables for years. But what about the dishes that push the limits? A little quirky, a bit wild, and sometimes just hard to believe. Those are next, and you won't want to miss what's coming up. So we've talked about the classics, the crowd pleasers you might still find in a grandma's handwritten recipe book. But now, get ready for the curveballs, the dishes that made strangers raise an eyebrow and locals grin with pride. Hillbilly kitchens of the 1970s were full of surprises, and some of them honestly might shock you. Let's start right at the top. Hogshead cheese. Just hearing the name makes folks curious, and maybe a little nervous. But there's nothing cheesy about it. Imagine a huge boiled hog's head, stripped clean of meat, cartilage, and fat. All that good stuff chopped up and simmered back together with spices, onions, and vinegar. When it cools, it turns to a shimmering, slightly wobbly loaf, thanks to natural gelatin in the bones. When you slice through it, the glistening, see-through jelly, bits of pink meat and white fat, a sharp vinegary smell drifts up. Some folks shudder, others can't cut fast enough. It's served cold on a cracker or bread, and if you ask Uncle Ray, he'll say, if you can get past the look, it's the best bite in the world. If you've never seen hogshead cheese up close, picture a loaf that catches the kitchen light and glistens in weird, fascinating ways. Grandma Dottie used to set hers on the counter when company came by, knowing somebody would lean in, wrinkle their nose, and ask, "What in the world is that?" Dottie would just grin, slice off a chunk, and hand it over. She believed the true taste of home was about finding beauty in what others tossed aside. She'd tell us, every bit of that hog had a place on our table. Waste not, Want not. Next up, fried squirrel stew. This one's the stuff of Appalachian legend. A group of cousins would head out at sunrise, 22 rifles slung over their shoulders. Come home, clean the catch behind the woodshed. Sometimes there'd be 6 or 7 squirrels lined up. The meat was dredged in flour, fried up till crispy, then thrown into a big pot with carrots, potatoes, and herbs. The scent drifting out the kitchen door was deep and woodsy, earth, smoke, and gravy. The community made a tradition out of this. Chase, a local hunter, remembered how the whole family talked and laughed around the table, even if supper looked you right in the eye. Some folks would argue there's nothing like the first spoonful. The stew's gravy soaks into hunks of crusty bread, and you can feel a smoky warmth right down to your bones. But not everyone felt brave, especially the kids. Annie, just 7 at the time, once stared wide-eyed at the stew and whispered, "Are the tails still in here?" That broke everyone up, and she always got the biggest serving after that. Now, brace yourself, Jell-O salad with canned fish. You're thinking, there's no way that's real. But in the 1970s, walls of wobbly Jell-O held just about anything, even flaky tuna or salmon. Picture a Technicolor mold, a glowing green ring with a sparkling glaze, full of pink flecks, shreds of celery, and peas. Someone gently shakes the plate, and the concoction quivers. The first bite is, well, it's probably not for the faint of heart. Some say it was a way to stretch a fancy dish for church suppers when money was tight. Reactions range from polite smiles to what were they thinking. But a few outliers loved it. For church picnics, the brave might load up their plate and try to hide their faces as that first bite hit. Mrs. Wanda remembered, "I liked how the Jell-O tickled my tongue, but the fish? I don't know what we were doing back then." Sometimes, out of 20 people, only 1 or 2 would go back for seconds, but those few swore it was a taste they'd never forget. Another oddball? Poke salad. Pokeweed is a wild plant, poisonous when raw, but tasty if prepared right. Folks would pick the young greens, boil them twice to leach out the toxins, then fry the leaves with eggs and salt pork. Grandma Ruth used to say, "You want it hot, crispy, and just a little bit dangerous." Some folks swore by its spring cleaning powers, helping the body shake off winter's sluggishness. And those poke-picking days became their own little festival. You'd see ladies in sun hats, dragging buckets, laughing about who braved the most bitter bite last spring. It took steady hands and lots of care. Not every plant was safe to eat. The kitchen would fill with a salty, almost spinach-like aroma, tinged with smoky bacon. Ruth would sneak bites right out of the skillet and chuckle, "If it don't tingle your lips, you boiled it right." Let's not forget possum and sweet potato pie. That's right, real possum. Slow-cooked and shredded, then mixed with mashed sweet potato and a dash of molasses inside a flaky pie crust. It was earthy, gamey, and a little bit sweet. Rare these days. But in tougher times, you ate what you could catch. Grandpa Lou always winked, "If you closed your eyes, you might never know." Lou's stories about possum pie went back generations. After a long hunt, everyone in the family had a job: peeling potatoes, rolling dough, or keeping the fire fed. The grandkids would peek under the pot lid, half hoping a possum paw might wave back at them. When the first slice was cut, you could see steam swirl out, and sometimes catch the whole room holding their breath before tasting. Here's a sweet one: vinegar pie. Sugar was hard to come by, but vinegar wasn't. You'd make a custard pie, swapping some of the milk and lemon with cider vinegar. The taste? Tart, tangy, and richer than you'd expect. The golden brown filling baked up with a shine. Some say the recipe was born out of sheer stubbornness, a way to have dessert when you had almost nothing else. At Sunday suppers, someone always had a memory to share. Edith remembered her daddy's birthday, when Mama managed to bake 2 vinegar pies with borrowed sugar and a splash of store-bought vanilla. "Every bite tasted like hope," she said. You never forget childhood pies, especially the strange ones. Then you had rolled oats stretched with applesauce, fried in a pan to make cheap, filling dessert pancakes. On Sundays, if you really wanted to try something different, creamed corn spoon bread might show up, baked in an old bean pot, puffed and golden, dolloped onto plates steaming hot. Sometimes these quirky meals brought more laughter than anything. Aunt June remembered a failed Jell-O salad at the church potluck. It slid off the table, the fish bounced, and no one claimed it. Every dish had a story. Sometimes dishes came about by accident, like catfish fried in pancake batter when flour ran out, or a jelly sandwich made with corncob syrup. There's an endless supply of quick, quirky backstories from mountain towns. Some say hogshead cheese became a point of pride, as a waste-nothing approach, while others tell of the annual spring squirrel hunt as an excuse for extended family to visit, cook, and share tall tales. Even the Jell-O fish salad has its roots in potluck showmanship, a way to stand out in a sea of green bean casseroles. You might be thinking, who came up with these? The answer is simple: people who had little and wanted to make life a little brighter. Folks dared each other to try the oddball meals and shared plenty of laughter when things didn't turn out right. Every generation has a weird favorite. Lily, now in her 60s, laughs when she remembers how her dad would threaten to pack possum pie for her lunch if she fussed about school. And here's the thing, these weren't just experiments. They were acts of creativity in hard times. Finding joy in strange tastes, making memories out of what little you had, and always finding a reason to come together at the table. Sometimes, it was the weird recipes that brought the most fun. Have you ever heard of any of these dishes? Maybe you've tried some? Let us know in the comments. Would you go for a slice of hogshead cheese, or do you draw the line at Jell-O with fish? And now that we've dug deep into the wildest, funniest, even a little shocking recipes, it makes you wonder, why did so many of these quirky, and even the everyday, suppers vanish from our kitchens in the first place? Get ready for the story of how modern life swept away these hard-earned traditions. It seems wild that dishes packed with so much history and heart could just fade away. But that's exactly what happened to so many hillbilly suppers from the 1970s and before. Let's pull back the curtain and see how a whole way of eating and living slipped out of sight. Back in those days, dinner time looked pretty different. Families sat together, food piled in the center of the table, and most of it came straight from someone's hands or garden. Picture a big kitchen, a screen door banging in the summertime, the chatter bouncing off the walls, and the savory smell of beans or fresh bread in the air. Maybe you'd hear the hiss of a skillet or the quiet snap as someone snapped beans for tomorrow's meal. The sense of togetherness was strong. You learned stories of Grandpa's garden or Grandma's secrets for biscuits. Food was more than dinner, it was an anchor for the whole day. Now think about today. The pull of international cuisines got strong. By the late 70s, Chinese takeout, pizza, and even tacos were showing up in small towns, changing taste buds everywhere. Suddenly, the idea of beans and bacon every night didn't feel as exciting when you had pepperoni pizza or sweet and sour chicken knocking at your door. I remember my aunt telling me about the first time a pizza place opened in her town. She said, everyone piled inside, and nobody could decide what to order. The smell was like nothing we'd had at home. Beans went right out the window. It wasn't just new flavors, though. Convenience changed everything. Grocery stores exploded with frozen meals in boxes you could just open and heat up. You didn't need to boil beans all day, there was canned soup on the shelf, ready in minutes. Hungry at midnight? Pop a frozen lasagna in the oven. And let's be honest, coming home from a long day, it was just easier to toss something in the microwave instead of spending hours tending a hot stove. Even the rhythm of cooking changed. People went from slow, careful prep to rushing through dinner, half watching TV. Some folks missed that old rhythm, even if they'd admit how handy a boxed dinner was on a tired night. Mothers who used to knead dough for biscuits or can vegetables for winter found themselves with more options, and often less time. Women were going to work in bigger numbers. Schedules were hectic, and every shortcut counted. In busy new families, those long-together times in the kitchen shrank. You might not even eat all at once. Everyone grabbed a plate and scattered to their own space. That meant complicated, slow-cooked meals, the kind that needed teamwork and patience, fell out of habit. Mary Ellen, who raised 4 kids, said it best. "We used to shell peas and tell stories. Now, we don't have time to tell anyone's day. Dinner's just another thing on the to-do list." Generational change played a big part too. Grandparents who knew all the tricks, like stretching flour with mashed potato or swapping bacon grease for butter, got older. Their kids and grandkids, who'd grown up with TV and bright supermarket aisles, learned different ways to cook. Instead of standing next to Granny, watching her eyeball spices and pinch dough until it felt right, the next batch of cooks turned to cookbooks, then recipes on the back of boxes, then the internet. That kitchen wisdom, passed down when everyone worked side by side, started to fade away. Soon, those old recipes weren't being passed down. Why would you learn how to can green beans when you could just grab a bag out of the freezer? Or scrub a washboard to prep Sunday meat when the grocer sold boneless, skinless chicken ready to cook? Some families kept recipe cards in little tin boxes, stained and sweet with stories, but fewer hands reached for them each year. It's easy to scoff at scrubbing a sink full of pint jars. But listen long enough, and you'll hear pride in voices that remember. We ate through hard winters, 'cause we put up every bit we could. Another big reason: money changed everything. Some pantry staples, once dirt cheap, got more expensive as agricultural prices shifted. Lard was seen as unhealthy, so stores pushed margarine and vegetable oils instead. Suddenly, fat that had been a kitchen treasure was called bad, and people wanted shiny new packaging, even if it was pricier. Dry beans, though cheap, couldn't compete with boxes of flavored rice or noodles. Cornmeal gave way to sandwich bread from the bakery aisle. Sometimes, food choices were about keeping up appearances too. Picture a kid trading a home-packed pimento cheese sandwich for a friend's bologna on Wonder Bread, just to feel modern. Let's not forget the power of advertising. TV commercials showed glowing, polished kitchens with cheerful families eating processed foods. Meal ideas came from grocery displays, not the old battered cookbook in the cabinet. Heat and eat became the future, faster than anyone could have imagined. You saw boxes promising dinner in 5 minutes. And convenience started to feel like love. Something you did for your family, even if it meant cutting corners. Even flavor expectations shifted. Kids grew up on sweeter, saltier, more uniform tastes. The bold, sometimes funky flavors of wild greens, game meats, or vinegar pies grew foreign. Families argued less over the last dumpling or rabbit stew. It was pizza night, or spaghetti night, or frozen fish sticks on a tray. Andy once admitted, "I couldn't even get my grandkids to taste poke salad. They said it smelt funny and wanted chicken nuggets instead." Stories from the time show just how fast things rolled. Carol, whose mother made potato cakes every Thursday, said, "By the time I finished high school, nobody I knew was eating homemade food on weekdays. We wanted TV dinners or takeout." Harold kept his family's bean recipe secret, but his kids never wanted to learn. It felt old-fashioned, they said. And so the chain broke, one link at a time. These stories aren't rare. They echo everywhere from church suppers to faded family reunions. Bit by bit, the skills disappeared too. Younger cooks weren't taught how to season cast iron or keep lard soft in a crock. Mason jars filled with preserves became displays, not groceries. Even the kitchen sounds changed. Gone were the overlapping clatter and chatter, replaced by beeps and buzzes of appliances. Kitchens got quieter, more solitary. For some people, it felt like losing more than food. It was a piece of themselves, their own history packed away on a forgotten pantry shelf. Still, even as these meals left the table, memories stuck around. Folks would talk about how beans tasted better after simmering all day, or how fried green tomatoes crisped in bacon grease beat any restaurant chip. Some even found their way back to old recipes after years away, just for comfort or nostalgia. You'd hear people say, "I just make Mama's applesauce cake when I miss home," or "Nothing tastes like the soup my granddad threw together on snowy days." Those memories shine, even if the suppers themselves seem gone. But here's the question: will these dishes stay gone? Or can we bring back a little of that magic and flavor for our own families, even just once in a while? There might be more hope and more lessons to learn than you'd think. But how do we actually pull these old traditions back from the past? Here's the thing. Those hillbilly pantry suppers we've talked about aren't just old recipes gathering dust. They're stories, memories, and tiny slices of a life where every meal meant something extra. Maybe it was pride in making do. Maybe it was love carried in every bowl. Or maybe it was just the comfort of sharing a meal with people you care about. But all of it still matters today, maybe even more than back then. So I want to challenge you. Right now, choose just one of these dishes we talked about. Maybe it's skillet cornbread, fried cabbage and apples. Or maybe you're feeling brave and want to try vinegar pie, or if you dare, Jell-O with canned fish. Try it this week. See what happens when you fill your kitchen with these old scents and sounds. And then, share it in the comments. What surprised you? Whose face lit up? What went totally wrong? And what went better than you expected? There's something special about making food that's more than a recipe. When you pull out a cast iron pan or mash potatoes by hand, you're connecting with generations who cooked before you. You're bringing a little bit of their grit, creativity, and humor into your own life. You're not just eating supper, you're bringing a whole world back to life. And here's where it really gets fun. Maybe you've got a family recipe that's too good not to share. Does your grandma's whatever's in the fridge stew have a weird ingredient? Did your grandpa survive off ketchup sandwiches or browned cornmeal mush? Post your stories below. Tell us the legends, the failures, and the flavors unique to your family's table. Not just the pretty ones, but the oddballs too. Your voice just might start the next tradition for someone else watching. If you try an old-fashioned supper, bring your crew along. Get your kids in the kitchen and let them measure beans or scrape the skillet. Teach them what you remember, even if it's just how to tell if biscuits are done by smell alone. Teach them it's okay if it doesn't look perfect, so long as you're laughing and sharing as you cook. Rediscovering flavors isn't about turning back the clock or pretending times never changed. It's about picking up the best parts of the past, resourcefulness, warmth, pride in simple things, and weaving them into right now. It's about remembering how a humble meal can stick in your heart for decades. Because sometimes, the foods we forget ended up being the ones that made us feel the most at home. Picture this. You're standing in your kitchen. Flour dust swirling in the air like magic. Butter sizzling in a hot pan. The sweet smell of apples and cinnamon dancing out of the oven. Maybe your kid says, "It smells like Nana's house in here." Or you taste your first spoonful of stewed beans and, just for a second, you're 8 years old again, standing on a rickety chair so you can reach the counter. That's the power these recipes hold. One of our viewers recently shared in the comments that making fried corn with her daughter brought her right back to summers on her grandma's porch. The sound of cicadas humming. Those details. What the kitchen sounded like, the crackle when the food hit the pan, the giggling and teasing over who'd get the biggest biscuit, those are the moments we pass on. Let's build something together in this community, recipe by recipe, memory by memory. Will you share the story of your family's lost Sunday gravy? Or a disaster meal that made everyone laugh? Or maybe you just want to say hello and swap ideas about what you're cooking tonight. Every comment adds another thread to this tapestry, and I'll be right there reading, responding, and cheering you on. Don't be shy about the details, either. What did it taste like? Did the recipe call for something odd, like buttermilk or peanuts, or even a splash of pickle juice? Did you make it your own? Tonight, when you pull something out of your pantry, ask yourself, how could I give this a hillbilly twist? What new story can I cook up? And if you share your experiments in the comments, I'll be cheering you on, swapping stories, and maybe even drooling a little reading what you've made. Here's a hint for next time. There's a sweet surprise on the horizon. An ingredient you'd never expect coming back in old-school desserts. You might want to tune in, because there's more flavor history waiting just ahead, hidden in the most unlikely places. And that's the best kind of secret to keep alive.